Hello there, welcome back to Mudwalkers. My name is Chris. If you're new to the channel, hit like, share, subscribe. If you're on Vimeo, give me a heart and a follow. If you're on Rumble, hit the Rumble button. There's a link to Patreon in the description down below if you'd like to support what I do. There's also a link tree for all my social media and things. If you're on YouTube, watch out for Vimeo. It's uncensored, okay? So if you'd like to keep all of the, safe for work side of Mudwalkers without any nudity, stay on YouTube, please. With that, let's get into the video. I have told this story on the channel before. So if you've been here a long time, apologies. But if you're new to the channel, then I think it's important for me to tell you this story. As a naturist, it's easy to be accused of just rationalizing the text because it's what you want to be true. You want it to be true that nudism is fine, so of course you're going to rationalize your way into it. That's not what happened with me. Many of my Christian brothers and sisters watching this video will be familiar with a man named Lee Strobel. He was an atheist back in the day, and then he decided he would take it upon himself as a journalist to prove the Bible wrong. Well, he became a Christian because the harder he tried to disprove it, the more apparent it became that the Bible was actually true. Jesus is actually the Son of God who did actually rise from the dead on the third day to atone for all of our sins and to promise us an eventual resurrection on the new earth. Hello, bird. Nothing to say now? Well, I had a similar experience because I started out, die hard in favor of conventional modesty. But when I went to the Bible, the results were not what I expected. You see, I was 17 at the time, and I had the usual issues that 17-year-old boys have, including lust and pornography, like pretty much all young men do in this country. And then when I would go to youth group, the girls were dressed, comparatively modestly. But when they wore shorts that were a little too short, when they wore sleeves that were a little too short, when they showed a little bit too much of the back, a little bit too much of the chest, I struggled. I really struggled with that. It was difficult for me to go to youth group, even though my friends were there and I wanted to worship and be part of God's people. It was difficult for me because it seemed like these girls either didn't know or didn't care that they were making me suffer through youth group. So as far as I was concerned, it was their fault. It was their fault, and if anywhere was supposed to be a safe place for me as a man to not lust, it should be church. But I found, as many men do, that it was actually a minefield. I had already kind of been wanting to base my beliefs directly on scripture for a while. I knew that was an important part of being a thinking Christian, was being able to defend your views directly from the Bible. My parents actually instilled that in me. Thanks, Mom. Thanks, Dad. And I ended up going on a 2-week mission trip in the year 2012 with my mother. And it unexpectedly turned into a 3-month mission trip due to some unforeseen but heaven-blessed circumstances. We ended up spending one of the best summers of our lives down there. I learned to speak fluent Spanish. I still speak a little Spanish, but it's fading. And I was stuck in the missionary compound for hours and hours a day with no entertainment except a Kindle book with old books on it, which I burned through all the interesting ones. And then there was a laptop with some Bible software. In preparation for this video, by the way, I looked up, old Bible software. And I found what I think is the exact program. It's called eSword. It's a free download, so don't worry about the price. It's available if you just type in eSword Bible software in Google. Don't worry, just because it's free doesn't mean it has malware. It's perfectly safe. And yeah, when I found that software today, I got so excited because I think this is the exact program, a newer version of it obviously, but I think it's the exact program that I used in Nicaragua that summer to do all my original searches, and it brought me right back. It brought back those awful, awful memories. Awful why? Let's get into that. So, stuck with this Bible software. So, stuck in there with this Bible software, I I decided to start systematically going through my beliefs and finding verses to back them up. Now, I didn't know this at the time, but it's actually called systematic theology. I just didn't know those words at the time. So I was going to do my own research and find my own verses for my own beliefs, because I was going to know why I believed what I believed. So I thought, what's the most basic, simple, easy thing you could possibly find in the Bible? Well, listening to my youth pastors over the years, I thought, well, modesty has got to be that, right? So I'll just start there. So I went searching with all the keywords I could think of: clothes, clothes, clothing, clothed, naked, nakedness, nude, nudity, breast, leg, knee, buttock, belly, breast, shoulder, neck, nipple, everything I could think of. All the words that could possibly be associated with this, as far as I knew, I entered those into the search bar. And I did not find any rules that required that a woman had to cover her breasts or nipples. That was my first discovery. And it, as you can see, as I'm reliving the memory, that was deeply disconcerting. The idea that the support I was looking for what was probably the worst of all my lusts at the time didn't exist was terrifying. It was absolutely petrifying, the idea that the Bible didn't actually have a rule there to protect me from what I thought was the most dangerous part of a woman's body. And I had to wrestle with that. And I remember confiding in my mother that night about my discovery, and she was livid. She was livid. She said, "You really think there's nothing wrong with this? A woman can just walk around with her breasts out and there's no problem." And I said, well, I mean, the Bible doesn't have a rule against it. I'm not saying it's fine, but I can't use the Bible to condemn it. I'm as terrified of this, I was as terrified of that idea as she was insulted by it. And I didn't know what to do with it. And I kept looking, and I thought, surely there's going to be something. But there was no rule against covering anything. Not the buttocks, not the genitals, nothing. Which again was, scary. It was a scary discovery. So I was left wrestling with the fact that when I went back to the States, I had literally nothing to give my Christian sisters to protect me from their bodies with. No verses. Wow, I'm getting emotional remembering all this. So eventually I just had to admit that the Bible had no rules about this, and I had to tell my parents, and they were upset, shall we say. And we had knockdown, drag-out arguments about it. It's not even that I thought that being naked was good. There wasn't a biblical mandate against it. And I found it as troubling as they found it offensive. But what am I supposed to say? That there is something in the scriptures that is not there? I can't lie about it. The fact is, the rule didn't exist. And part of the reason it was so scary for them, I think, is because they knew how much of a problem I was having with lust and porn as it was. So the idea that this could lead me in a direction that would only intensify my suffering and the harm I was doing to myself, I can see how that would have been really troubling for them. So their offense was motivated by paradigmatic shock, yes, but it was also motivated by love. They were concerned about me, and I value and respect that. Speaking of my parents, they raised me with the concept of good and evil also being benefit and harm. So take theft, for example. If I become a kleptomaniac and just start stealing from people left and right, no one is going to want to give me anything, spend any time around me, or support me. So what ultimately happens to me? Stealing all the time ultimately isolates me both socially and economically, which means I suffer. So my sin harms, yes, the people around me. Theft definitely harms the victims of thievery. But it also harms the thief. This is true of every single sin. It's always harmful to the person who does it, in addition to the community. So with this concept in mind, from my parents, I decided to expand beyond Scripture because Scripture didn't have an answer to it. So I was going to look for answers somewhere else. The Bible doesn't explain the law of gravity, so we go elsewhere to explain the law of gravity. The things the Bible doesn't cover, we go to science to cover. Like DNA, for example. The Bible doesn't lay out how DNA works. We got to use microscopes for that. So I decided to use science to go with this issue because the Scripture had nothing to offer. And again, the results began to surprise me. Because I figured the most beneficial course had to be the most righteous one. In theory, at least. I mean, that was a theory that I was willing to throw off if it turned out to be wrong. But I decided to look for the most beneficial course and then see how moral it turned out to be, because I figured that they would probably line up. I went looking for biological reasons to cover up, and the only ones I could find were basically environmental reasons, like if it's too hot, it's too cold, or you're going to get poked, stabbed, or cut with something, or burned on a stove. Like, yeah, you should cover up your skin to protect it. But other than that, it seemed like clothes did a lot of harm. Like for example, if you wear closed-toed shoes and socks 24/7, okay, not when you sleep, but especially that would be crazy. You actually get a lot of foot problems. When women wear bras for too long, they end up with breast problems. When you lash things over your skin excessively, it tends to cause problems. So you know what is some of the best stuff you could do for your body when it comes to this issue? Is fresh air and sunshine. If you can stand to wear a short sleeve shirt, wear a short sleeve shirt. If you can go without the hat, go without the hat. Unless it's going to do you some harm, go ahead and take that stuff off, because it's going to be better for you to have it off. So that began to point me in a certain direction, which again was kind of disconcerting. But given that the Bible didn't condemn it, I was less uncomfortable with it now, but still uncomfortable. I also went looking for sociological and anthropological reasons to cover up. But what I discovered was that the more a culture covered up, it seemed like the worse their lust problem became. So, like for example, in ancient China, a woman's feet, shush, okay, you dirty little mind monster. A woman's feet were considered the sole viewing pleasure of her husband, and no one else. And to see the toes or the foot was considered deeply erotic. Well, when you cover the foot all the time, of course it's going to become erotic. Or like in the Middle East, in the Islamic world, a woman's hair is considered erotic. So if a woman takes her hat off, her hijab off, she could get raped. And if she reveals, even to a degree that we as Americans would think is really conservative, like a t-shirt or like jeans, she can get raped and then get blamed for being raped because obviously she's a whore and she was just asking for it, and then she'll get stoned to death for being raped. So I mean, clearly covering up doesn't solve the issue, because the more you cover up, it seems like it makes the problem worse. Well then at some point, when you come back away from covering too much, you got to find the degree at which it actually helps. But that's where things started to get really, really interesting. Because what I found then was that people who didn't wear clothes tended not to have lust and pornography problems. Let me say that again. People who were naked all the time with other naked people tended not to have lust or pornography struggles. That's not to say that they were very lustful and that they imbibed a lot of porn and they just were fine with it. It's that they weren't. They just weren't lusting and they weren't looking at porn. They just didn't. And even if they walked a similar path as I had and suffered as I had suffered and been as attached to these things as I was, or more so, these men reported that Naturism actually healed them of a lot of these issues, or at least made them so manageable that it was easy to resist the temptation. Like even if the temptation was still there, they could manage it because of Naturism. So again, I'm left with this idea that the most beneficial course, the one, the most healing one, the healthiest one, is probably the righteous one, but then it's naked people, and what do you do with that? I also found that Naturism has, health benefits for your skin and your brain, your internal organs, your bones, and psychologically. It's really, really good for you. It started to stack up that Naturism looked better and better regardless of how I felt about it. Men and women have different predominant struggles between the sexes. But it doesn't matter if you're a woman or a man. Naturism uplifts you and helps you deal with those struggles. It can even remove them in a lot of cases, like in the case of lust and pornography, for example. But it also improves things socially and societally. It changes how you interact with people in a really good way, which was fascinating. So less was better biologically, anthropologically, and societally. And no clothes at all seemed like the best option out of all of them so far, which I didn't really know what to do with. But I do know what to do with the next 2 minutes of this video, which is to talk about Patreon. This episode of Mudwalkers is indeed brought to you by Patreon. These guys are making the channel possible and happen. They're keeping my work sustainable. They are the big highlight of Mudwalkers. There's a monthly video call where we get to hang out all together, everyone at the $10 level and above on Patreon, where we get to share stories and swap ideas and in general hang out and have fun. It's one of the highlights of my month. And guys, I can't thank you enough for what you're doing on Patreon. You really are making the channel as we know it possible. I would not be able to do the travel that I'm doing, make the kind of videos that I'm making, or buy the kind of hardware that I am using without Patreon. You guys are making it possible for me to spread this good message on a grander scale than I ever could have dreamed of on my own. And Mudwalkers is only growing. We recently hit 900 subscribers, which is awesome. And am I forgetting anything? Nope, I think that covers it. Back to the video. So people claimed up and down among Christian naturists that I found online. People claimed up and down that naturism was beneficial. I'm not stupid, okay? I don't believe things just because I read them on the internet. I want proof. I wanted proof then, and I was going to get it. By the way, a very good tip if you're going to look into this issue as a textile is go into your browser and see if you can shut off the images function. In Google Chrome, you can actually go into your settings. This is the browser that I was using at the time. If you want to go and interact with Christian naturists online, you can actually go into Google Chrome and turn off all images so that all you receive is blank color on the websites or just text. And those are the two things that you'll see. No images, no photos, no like JPGs or anything like that. Just basic colors and text. That's all you're going to get. So if you have the ability to turn that stuff off, that could actually help you if you're just getting into this issue. Food for thought. One of the most fundamental beliefs in conventional modesty is the idea that a man faced with a naked woman in his presence is incapable of not lusting after that woman, which is why that's just reserved for a man and his wife, because I mean, that's the woman you're like allowed to like have that kind of sexual drive for, so it's fine. But Christian naturist men and women, but you know, was most important coming from the men, they claimed that they had learned how to not lust after a woman in their own presence. A naked woman, which sounded impossible. I was watching a lot of porn in those days anyway, so I mean, what was the harm in, you know, another naked picture? Which I know is super dark and nihilistic, okay, but it made sense at the time. If these naturist men were lying, then I would be able to see that myself, at least in my own case, that I can't do it. But if they were right, then there was a solid chance that I could learn this too. So I decided to test it. And I went looking for the right kind of image. Not just any image would do. It had to be an image of a woman's entire body, but one that wasn't, you know, posed in certain ways. It had to be like a really, really normal looking picture of a woman. Clothed images incoming, but I wanted pictures kind of like this. You know, ones that just looked like, you know, normal pictures anyone would take. Photos you would see on Instagram or Facebook. But I wanted pictures like those, just without clothes in them. And I was able to find some. And I remember sitting down that first night and just looking at this picture and thinking, yeah, I want to see if I can really like do this. These Christian men said that it's possible, and I want to see if it's possible. Can I actually do this? So, like I said, I found some pictures of some naturists on the internet, And I just sat and looked at one. It was a picture of a woman. And I became aroused, as I expected. But I decided to sit with it and just refused to engage with my arousal and just looked. And I studied her face and the positions of her hands and her feet, her posture, the way that her legs were arranged, just like reading the energy and spirit of the photo. Part of the reason that I kept looking is because I realized that even though my body was reacting, my mind was not. My mind was in the zone, focused on the task at hand, which wasn't that. It was this. It was figuring out, is this possible? My mind was dead set on that. My body was distracting me from what my mind was trying to do. So I kept focused mentally on the task at hand. And as I did, as I made that deliberate, conscious decision to stay focused, to ignore that physical reaction, and just focus on the mental task at hand, my arousal dissipated. To my amazement, and I was just left with that cold fact. To my shock, I was sitting naked in front of a photograph of a naked woman, full frontal, and I was no longer aroused, physically or mentally. And I had done it. It was possible. This meant maybe, there was hope that the healing these men talked about could be out there for me too. I didn't want to hope that. I'm a pessimist by trade, so I tend to expect the worst. And yet this experience did start to give me hope. And I found more images, and I did the same thing. And I found that the physical reaction happened less and less. And those experiences have forever changed how I see the human body. 12 years later, I'm not going around just like scrolling through naturist photos anymore. I'm actually out here just like with real naturist people, real human beings. But I've found that in person and on naturist social media, like Twitter or MeWe or whatever, when I do happen upon a picture of a fellow naturist, just like the whole person, it's exactly, right there, it's exactly what it looks like to me, is just an entire person. The way that a textile feels with seeing someone from the top of her head down to the bottom of her neck, just like that quick scan, that's what she looks like. That's the same reaction that I have with naturists, male or female. So remember these pictures from before. You're able to look at this picture and just see the person, right? When I see a similar picture as this, but without clothes, I have the same reaction now. So, that was, a neat little test, a neat little experiment. That was 2012, maybe 2013. And then a few years later, 2017, I got married in 2016, and my wife and I talked about it, and we finally decided I would go to a naturist resort and get some actual field experience. Not just, in front of a computer screen or, just theorizing in my head, but actually boots on the ground. Let's see if this is actually really in real life possible. So I grabbed my copy of Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, and I went off to Indian Hills Nudist Park in Slidell, Louisiana. If you're ever passing through Louisiana as a naturist, by the way, stop in Indian Hills. It's a nice place, nice people. No, it's not as grand and fancy as other resorts, but I really like the laid-back, rural sort of feel and culture that Indian Hills has. It's very, very relaxed and laid back. I like I like the people, I like the facility, and I go back there as much as I can. There's actually a whole video I did up here about going to Indian Hills for the first time, if you're interested in hearing that whole story. But long story short, I found that, yeah, you can actually do this in person and not lust. Just hang out with people and talk to people. It's shockingly easy. And I mean shocking. So if you're ever watching this channel and thinking, well, this guy just rationalized his way into this. He just wanted nudism to be the right thing. No, I didn't. I started out as hardline with modesty as anybody else I knew could be. So, no, this is not what I wanted to be the case. It's a lot more like the case for Christ with Lee Strobel, where he tried to prove the Bible wrong and ended up becoming a Christian. Well, I tried to prove modesty right and became a nudist. So this is quite the opposite of what I wanted or expected. But it has changed my life for the better. I used to struggle with lust every day, every hour. I used to struggle with porn every single day. Every single day. Now I don't. I don't have a lust problem anymore. And porn is a thing of the past. And I want you to know, as a man watching this video, if you're watching this, there is hope for you. Okay? Not only is there forgiveness in Jesus Christ, who can save you from all that, regardless of whether or not you get over it in this life, but there is a deep, deep healing for you as a Christian in Naturism. The Lord has put amazing things in the world around us that heal us. Water cures our thirst. Salt helps to regulate our body's processes. Vitamins help to boost our body in lots of different ways. The sun gives us vitamin D. There are things in this world that He has put in our path to help us. Oh, by the way, being social with other people improves your mental health. Who would have thought? So the fact that something is a part of the natural fabric of reality doesn't mean it's not curative, doesn't mean that God didn't put it there. This is an avenue God has given us to be healed of these things, to help correct our minds and our hearts when it comes to these issues. So I would encourage you, there is hope for you. Don't give up, don't languish, don't think of this as impossible. If you think something is impossible, are you really going to try? If you tell a child her entire life, she will never, ever run. She will never be worth anything running. She'll never be able to run fast. Do you think she's ever going to run? If you tell her that running is impossible, do you think she's ever going to run? No, of course not. So, look to people like me. Look to other Christian naturist men who have walked this path before and have found healing. And I want to give you that hope. Now, granted, I do not want to lead you into things against the witness of your own conscience. In Romans chapter, my shoes are giving me fits. I hate shoes. Anyhow, the buck moth caterpillars are still out, so I got to keep wearing shoes so I don't get, stings on my feet. Stepping on a buck moth caterpillar is like stepping on a wasp or a bee. It's unpleasant. So, like I said, Romans 14, I don't want to lead you into anything against your own conscience. If looking into Naturism, or if trying to get involved in Naturism feels like sin, then don't do it. Please don't do it. Paul says in Romans chapter 14, when he's talking about meat offered to idols, he's saying, meat offered to idols is fine. Anybody can eat that. But he who has doubts is condemned if he eats. If you have doubts about this, if you think that this is, still wrong for you to do, if it feels wrong, don't do it. Please don't do that. This needs to be squared away with your conscience first. Now, if you think it will help with your conscience, there's a whole playlist up here called Nudism and the Bible, or is it Naturism and the Bible? It's one of those. It's my Bible playlist. I wear clothes in every single one of those videos. In a lot of my other videos, I don't wear clothes. But in this playlist, every single video has me wearing clothes in it, and it always will. You can always come here to hear about the Bible and Naturism without worrying about nudity. It's always going to be right there. I'm not some kind of an expert. I'm not the be-all, end-all source. I'm not the, end of your research. But I hope that these videos can at least give you a good springboard and help you think as you do real research outside the channel. One of the condemnations that my mom gave me as I was getting into Naturism was I was just trading one form of pornography for another. That instead of looking at naked women on my computer, I would go gawking at women in person. That's just not what happens. It's not sexually gratifying. Imagine the amusement you would feel if a Middle Eastern man started arguing with you about hijabs. And how, you Christians just go to church with no hijabs because you men want to lust after the women of the church. You think you're so righteous, but you go around with these, hatless women walking everywhere. You lust-filled, pagans, you. Imagine the amusement and frustration you'd feel, because it would be immediately obvious to you that the hijab is a big part of his lust problem. That he is so badly overreacting to women's hair because it's being treated with too much legalism. That legalism is the reason why he has the lust in the first place. That's kind of how naturists feel. So, to sum it all up, hi. To sum it all up, I didn't want to be a naturist. I wanted to be a modestist. But I ultimately followed the evidence where it led. I changed my mind about it once. I could change my mind about it again. If you're seeing this, you know me locally, and you want to try to talk me out of it, go for it. I changed my mind about it once. I could change my mind about it again. I'll follow the evidence where it leads. If you're starting to kind of understand where I'm coming from, but you want to go on wearing clothes, that's fine. That's what Romans chapter 14 is there for, because there's a great degree of Christian liberty. If this is something that you don't want to participate in because you feel like it would be wrong for you to participate in it, but you feel like it's fine for other people, that's exactly what Romans 14 is there for. It's for coexistence. It's for not pushing our own consciences on other people. Now, me personally, I think that life and morality is better overall if people don't wear clothes. That does not mean that I'm going to go around my church telling people that they're sinning because they have pants on. Are you kidding me? So my conscience is my conscience, their consciences are their consciences, and we can live and let live. I think this is an important issue, but it's a tertiary issue. It's not even secondary. But ultimately, that's what Christian naturists want, is to coexist. Thanks for watching. Hi there, welcome back to Mudwalkers. My name is Chris. What was that? If you don't know what to do with Mudwalkers, then check out my Patreon. No. One of the most conventional, no, that's not right.